The classroom smelled of wet wool and chalk dust, thick enough to taste. In the corner, a coal-black stove radiated waves of heat that made the air shimmer, distorting the rows of wooden desks carved with initials of children long dead. 23 pairs of eyes stared forward, some blue, some brown, all glassy and unblinking in the dim gaslight. The teacher's hickory switch rested against her desk, its tip stained dark from use, and in the silence, someone could hear the rhythmic creak of the building settling, or perhaps something breathing within the walls. Miss Adelaide Thornton had taught in this one-room schoolhouse since 1903, and the children never seemed to age. But the most unsettling detail was onto the students' unchanging faces or the way their lips moved. Soundlessly during recitation it was the attendance ledger on her desk, where every name was written in fresh ink dated October 14, 1908, the day the school burned down. The question carved into the back wall, hidden behind a portrait of President Roosevelt, asked simply, did they survive the fire, or did the fire survive them? Chapter 1. The Architecture of Obedience. The Riverside School stood 3 stories tall when most rural schools barely managed one. Built in 1899 with donations from the timber baron Harrison Whitmore, the structure embodied an era's belief that education required physical intimidation. The ceilings soared 15 feet high, too tall for small voices to carry, forcing children to shout their lessons and strain their necks toward distant blackboards. Windows began 8 feet from the floor, deliberately positioned so students couldn't see outside, couldn't dream of escape during the endless recitations. The building's designer, architect Vernon Halstead, had previously designed a juvenile detention facility, and the similarities were unmistakable. Disciplined through design, the school board minutes from 1899 recorded, let the structure itself teach submission, but former students who visited decades later reported something peculiar. The building felt smaller inside than its exterior suggested, as if rooms had been sealed off or swallowed by the walls themselves. Chapter 2. The Curriculum of Silence. Morning began at 7:45 a.m. sharp with the recitation of multiplication tables until every voice became one voice. Teacher Lillian Mercer kept a punishment book. Its pages filled with infractions, spoke without permission 3 strikes with a rod, laughed during penmanship locked in coal cellar 2 hours, questioned the textbook no lunch 3 days. The curriculum itself was a weapon of conformity. Children memorized facts without context, repeated answers without understanding, wrote the same sentences 50 times until their hands cramped and bled onto the copybook. One child, young Theodore Walsh, once asked why the sky was blue during a science lesson. Miss Mercer marked him absent for 3 days, though neighbors swore they saw him through the windows, standing motionless in the corner. Years later, a researcher examining the school's records would find something impossible. Theodore's attendance marked present for every single day of 1907, including the 3 days he was supposedly punished. The handwriting in both entries matched perfectly. Chapter 3. The Numbers Behind the Nightmare. The scale of 1900s education reveals a system built on breaking spirits through sheer volume and deprivation. In 1900, America operated 212,000 one-room schoolhouses, educating 15.5 million at an average of 73 students per school, though some recorded over 100 crammed into spaces built for 40. The average school year lasted just 99 days. Because children were needed for farm labor, teachers earned $325 annually, $11,800 in today's currency, and 75% were women forbidden from marrying or they'd be immediately fired. Corporal punishment records from Pennsylvania in 1905 documented 23,000 corrective strikes administered across just 200 schools, an average of 115 beatings per school per year. The student-to-textbook ratio stood at 8-1. Children shared books, passing them hand to hand, spreading diseases that killed 12% of students before age 15. Truancy laws allowed sheriffs to arrest children and their parents, with 3,400 families imprisoned in 1908 alone for keeping children home. Chapter 4. The Bell That Rang Backward. The school bell developed a reputation for ringing at times when no one pulled the rope. Installed in 1901, the 200-pound brass bell originally called children to class at 8 a.m. noon, and 1 p.m. dismissal. But by 1906, neighbors began complaining about midnight chimes, 3 slow, deliberate rings that echoed across the valley. The school board hired watchmen to investigate, but they found the bell chamber empty, the rope coiled and undisturbed. Then came the reports from parents, children waking at 3 a.m., dressing in their school clothes, walking toward the building in their sleep. Pastor Abernathy suggested the bell was summoning something rather than someone, but when he attempted to remove it in 1907, 3 men fell from the tower, all survived. All refused to explain what they'd seen. The rationalists offered their explanation. The bell's housing had warped in the weather, causing wind pressure to move the clapper at irregular intervals. The Farmer's Almanac noted unusual wind patterns, that year gusts reaching 40 miles per hour on 17 separate midnight occasions. Yet the bell only rang on windless nights. Chapter 5. The Phantom Arithmetic. Miss Judith Crawley taught mathematics with an obsession that crossed into mania. She covered every wall with numbers-long division problems spiraling up to the ceiling, multiplication tables written in increasingly frantic handwriting, equations that seemed to lead nowhere and solve nothing. Students who failed exams were made to write numbers until their fingers bled, 1 to 1,000, over and over, filling copybook after copybook. But the strangest occurrence came in March 1907, when visiting Inspector Harold Pettigrew noticed something impossible. The equations on the walls were solving themselves. Numbers changed between his morning and afternoon visits. A problem left incomplete at 9 a.m. showed the correct answer by 2 p.m. Written in chalk dust that had settled into the grain of the blackboard, not applied from the outside, but somehow emerging from within. Miss Crawley died that summer of brain fever. The autopsy revealed nothing unusual, though the doctor noted her final words, "They're teaching me now." Chapter 6. The textbooks that rewrote themselves. The history books contained dates that hadn't happened yet. School board member Ernest Hammond first noticed the discrepancy in October 1908 while reviewing donated textbooks. A passage about the Great War in Europe referenced events from 1914 to 1918, 6 years in the future. He brought the book to the board meeting, but when they opened it together, the pages showed only conventional history of the Revolutionary War. Hammond insisted he'd seen different texts. The board suggested overwork and eye strain. 2 weeks later, the school burned. Investigators found 23 students and 1 teacher dead, or did they? The bodies were too badly burned to identify, yet the coroner counted 24 corpses in a school that held 23 students. Modern researchers examining surviving documents found newspaper articles about the fire printed 3 days before it occurred. Publishers claimed printing errors, misdated editions, but the articles contained details, names of victims, description of how the fire started that proved accurate down to the smallest particular. Chapter 7. The Scale of the Tragedy. The fire that consumed Riverside School fits a pattern of educational disasters that defined the era's negligence. Between 1900 and 1910, 412 American schools burned to the ground, killing 1,847 students and 78 teachers, most trapped by doors that opened inward, a design flaw mandated by local building codes meant to prevent children from escaping during class hours. The Riverside fire specifically claimed 23 confirmed dead on October 14, 1908, starting at 2:17 p.m. during geography lessons. The building's single exit door chained from the outside, per Superintendent Whitmore's orders to prevent truancy, turned the school into a crematorium. Fire companies arrived 43 minutes after the first alarm because the nearest station was 4.2 miles away on unpaved roads. The coal stove that started the fire had been inspected just 5 days earlier and declared safe for educational use, despite a cracked firebox that investigators later determined had been leaking carbon monoxide for months. Of the 67 schools in the county, only 12 had fire escapes, and none had fire drills. The concept didn't exist in educational policy until 1911. The school's construction used old-growth timber so dry and resinous that the entire structure collapsed in under 18 minutes. Chapter 8. The students who returned. The school rebuilt in 1910 on the same foundation. Despite protests from families who'd lost children, the new teacher, Miss Victoria Sterling, reported normal operations for the first month. Then came the absences, children vanishing from their desks mid-lesson, their names scratched from the attendance book by invisible hands. Miss Sterling would mark a student present at morning roll call, turn to write on the blackboard, and find their desk empty. Their books and slate vanished as if they'd never existed. The remaining students never reacted, never mentioned their disappeared classmates. By November 1910, Miss Sterling taught to an empty room, yet she continued her lessons, writing assignments on the board, collecting papers from desks that held no students. A traveling salesman passing by at midnight claimed he saw the windows full of children's faces, all watching him with expressions of desperate warning. The school closed permanently in 1911. Miss Sterling was found teaching to empty air. Her attendance book filled with 23 names, all marked present, all dated October 14, 1908. Chapter 9. The Evidence That Remains. Modern paranormal investigators who visited the ruins report electromagnetic anomalies and unexplained cold spots. Skeptics counter with documented evidence. The limestone foundation retains cold temperatures year-round, creating microclimates that feel supernatural but result from basic geology. The electromagnetic readings match naturally occurring variations in mineral deposits. The area sits on a small magnetite formation that compass needles confirm. Photographs showing orbs and shadow figures prove to be dust particles and light refraction when analyzed professionally. Audio recordings of children's voices resolve into wind through the collapsed structure and wildlife in surrounding woods. Yet one piece of evidence resists explanation: a slate board recovered from the ruins in 1955, now housed in the County Historical Society. Written in perfect Palmer method handwriting are the words, "We are still in class. We will always be in class. Please let us leave." Carbon dating places the chalk at 1908, but handwriting analysis confirms it was written in 1955, the same day the board was discovered. Epilogue: the question that haunts 42 people have reported seeing children in the ruins since 1911, some at twilight, others at midnight, all describing the same scene. 23 children sit at invisible desks, reciting lessons to a teacher who isn't there, trapped in an eternal school day that never ends. Are these psychic imprints recordings of trauma burned into the landscape, replaying like a phonograph whose needle never lifts? Or are these the actual spirits of children who died believing education was imprisonment, now sentenced to study forever as punishment for some unremembered transgression? The historical record shows the cruelty was real. The chains on doors, the beatings, the deprivation, the systematic breaking of young spirits in the name of civilization. The education system of 1900s America treated children as products to be molded through suffering, and schools like Riverside were the factories where innocence went to die, sometimes literally. Whether ghosts exist or not, the horror of those classrooms was never supernatural. It was policy, it was law, it was normal. And perhaps that's more terrifying than any ghost story, that adults looked at children and decided that cruelty was curriculum, that pain was pedagogy, that the best way to teach was to trap them in rooms they couldn't escape and break them until they submitted. The children in the ruins, whether real or imagined, ask the same question every witness reports hearing in their minds: if education requires imprisonment, whose freedom does it serve?